Cool. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for Young Not Broke's last live event, actually, on managing your student loans. So we're really excited that you all are here today. So to kick things off, I'd love to share a little bit about Young Not Broke and then tell you more about today's event and then introduce our speakers. So I started Young Not Broke a few months ago in November 2019 with the goal to share personal finance stories that were relatable to young people like us. From there, it's blossomed into a newsletter community that's almost 1,000 people strong. So we're very excited. We've recently kind of expanded into kind of breaking down personal finance topics and also launched a series of live events. So today's topic is on a very important topic of student loans. Student loans are something that a lot of people, I think, have a lot of confusion around, and oftentimes you're kind of just like thrown into them. So today's event is in partnership with UVA Student Financial Services. That's actually where I went to undergrad. So Chris and Dustin are going to be really great to kind of just talk about how student loans work and kind of what you can do with them post-grad, and also implications of the CARES Act, which is very, very important when it comes to what's going on in the economy right now and just due to the pandemic. So without further ado, I'd like to kind of hand it off to Chris and Dustin to kick it off for us.
Thank you, Kavya and Christina. It's good to be here. Thanks so much. A little bit about myself. I do work in student financial services at the University of Virginia. We're combined financial aid and student accounting services. I also have an accreditation as an accredited financial counselor through the AFCPE, which is a national organization. That's something I became very interested in after working with students for many, many years on the struggles they face. And so much of the decisions that you make really have to be driven by your values and your goals. And that's our emphasis as accredited financial counselors, is to think about help clients to, in this case, students, to figure out what it is that they really value, and then what goals they set, and how they then set up their own financial behaviors and their own financial plan to help to support those. So that's part of it. A little bit about myself, originally from Seattle, Washington. And I worked in a previous life at Amazon.com and at Starbucks Coffee Company back when things were much smaller with both of those organizations. So really glad to be here, and thanks. Look forward to talking with you tonight.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Dustin Ciraco, and as Chris and Kavya both mentioned, I also work in student financial services at the University of Virginia. My primary role at UVA is managing UVA's peer financial counseling program, which offers one-on-one counseling and support for students in all areas of personal finance. Like Chris, I'm also involved in the accredited financial counseling program. I am a candidate, though I did just find out yesterday that I passed my test, so that's a huge step forward. And then just a bit about me personally. I'm originally from Florida. I have a 70-pound hound dog named Luna, and I coach middle and high school basketball in my free time. So what I'm going to do now is start sharing my screen, if you'll bear with me for just 1 second. Oops, jumped ahead. But can everyone see my screen now? All right, excellent. So before we dive in, I think we're gonna ask just a couple of poll questions, if Kavya would like to help get those up.
Yep, launching them.
Thank you. All right, so take a second and look at these 2 questions, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. Great.
For those of you guys just joining us, we are doing a quick poll, and then Dustin is going to be kind of continuing with the presentation, but this is just going to help us understand where you all are coming from, and so that we can kind of guide the presentation in that direction. So please just take a quick second to answer it.
We'll maybe let it go 30 more seconds or so. All right, it looks like the responses have leveled off a little bit. Thank you, everyone who, we had a late response. Thank you, everyone who submitted. The good news is about number 2 is that we are going to discuss all of those things, and there was a pretty even distribution of what everyone had questions about. So that's something to look forward to. I'm going to stop sharing the results, I think. All right. So a brief overview of what we'll discuss today. We will go over some of the implications of the CARES Act and how it affects your student loans. We'll do a brief overview of student loans, specifically federal student loans. We'll talk about some exit counseling and repayment items, and then talk briefly about some long-term financial planning. And a few of the learning outcomes that you should feel like you'll be going home with after today's presentation are, as I mentioned, to understand implications of the CARES Act for federal loans and how it impacts you. Understand what your general repayment options are. Learn about options available for when and if you cannot make a payment. And talk about why personal financial management is not optional. And don't worry, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions. We have quite a few question breaks kind of built in after every section. So if you do have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box. Chris will be answering some questions through chat, and we'll be holding some questions until the question breaks. So the CARES Act. The CARES Act was signed into law as a result of the coronavirus pandemic at the end of March. And among other impacts, such as an economic relief package to individuals and payroll loans to businesses, it also contains significant provisions for students with federal loans. So we're going to discuss some of those, and especially the ones that will impact you as current college students or recent graduates. So all federal loans, which comprises subsidized loans, unsubsidized loans, and Parent Plus loans, are included in the CARES Act. And what has happened is that all interest rates have been set to 0% for a time period of March 13th, 2020 to September 30th, 2020. If you have already entered repayment, maybe you graduated a year or so ago, your payments have been automatically suspended or deferred during the same time period of March 13th to September 30th. And if you made a payment during this deferment period, a full refund is available to you if you contact your loan servicer. If you feel like you'd like to make a payment on your student loans during the time period before September 30th, the full amount of your payment will be applied to any accrued interest before it's applied to the principal. That's a little different from how a regular loan payment works, but we'll talk about in a couple slides why that's important. And the deferred payments during this time frame do count towards any loan forgiveness plans if you are interested in those, and we'll also talk about that in a lot more detail in a little bit. It's possible that there may be some more legislation coming in the future in regards to the CARES Act and federal student loans, but right now it's a little too early to tell. But if you're interested in learning a little more on what's out there, you can visit the website you see here. It's on the Federal Student Aid website. There have been a few reports that one loan servicing company in particular, Great Lakes, has not been accurately reporting the deferred payments during the pandemic. So what that means is if a student didn't think, well, they don't have to make payments during this time period, but folks that had Great Lakes as a loan servicer, they were reporting payments as late or missed. So that has a pretty significant impact on your credit score and your credit report. So it's really important that you are regularly checking your credit report. And why that's important is you can see all loan accounts that are tied to your name and your social security number, and they would show if your loan servicer has claimed that you've missed a payment or have been late on a payment. And there are protections in place to solve that. So typically you are entitled to one credit report per year from all three of the credit bureaus. But during the time of the coronavirus and the CARES Act, you're actually able to get up to 6 free credit reports, which is really substantial. And the place to get your free credit report is from a website called annualcreditreport.com. So that's kind of the one and only trusted place to get a copy of your credit report. So that brings us to our first question break. I'll pause for a minute or so and we'll see if anything has come into the chat box. And in a minute or two, we'll move on to the next section.
Somebody has a question. Does a 0% interest rate matter if you are in a grace period?
It does not. It does not if you have subsidized loans. If you had unsubsidized loans, that would be building interest, and we'll talk about that, I believe, on the very next slide. But it would matter in that you will not be building any interest during your time of deferment.
Looks like we're good to continue, I think.
Awesome. So we're going to move on into some repayment items. But first, we wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about kind of student loans in general and what kind of options are out there. Hopefully this slide will just serve as a kind of a simple review for everyone, but just in case. So the primary types of student loan options that are out there are, of course, your federal student loans. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, you have your subsidized loans, which are need-based loans, and those do not accrue any interest while a student is in school or during the 6-month grace period after graduation. You have unsubsidized loans, which act the same way as subsidized loans, with the exception that they do accrue, or they do build interest while a student is in school and during the 6-month grace period. So that's when the provisions of the CARES Act comes into play, because from the end of March until the end of September, you will not accrue any additional interest on your unsubsidized loans. And there are also Graduate Plus loans, which are very similar to unsubsidized loans, with the exception that you can borrow a little more money to help offset the higher cost of graduate school. They do build interest while you're in school, and they come with a slightly higher interest rate. There are also Parent Plus loans, which are a type of federal loan, but that's a little outside of the scope of today's presentation. And lastly, there are private education loans, which we won't talk about a great deal today, but just as a quick overview. Oh, and I did want to make a note. If you are unsure of who your loan servicer is, please write to Chris in the chat box, and he will help point you in the right direction of where you can go to find out what kind of loans you have and where to find out who your loan servicer is. So one of the most common questions that student and recent graduates have when it comes to their student loans is, when will I start making my student loan payments? The answer is simple. All federal student loans come with a 6-month grace period after graduation before repayment is required. So what that means is, if you graduated this spring, you should expect to enter repayment in November of 2020. If you are set to graduate next fall, then you would enter repayment in June of 2021. You can make payments while you're in school or during your grace period if you'd like to. It's not required, but it can make quite a bit of difference down the road. So we're going to talk a little bit about loan capitalization, but I wanted to ask for a little bit of participation here. Does anyone know what capitalization is on their student loans? Maybe just put it in the chat box if you think you know. There are no bad guesses. I know there's at least one brave soul out there. Okay, well, I won't put any more pressure on, but I'm going to put a little scenario up on this screen, and then I'll kind of talk through. Oh, I just saw something come in. Did we get a response? You're close. You're very close. All right, so I'm going to put. So let's say in this scenario that you've borrowed $5,000 each year you're in school at an interest rate of 5%. So when you graduate, you have, or you think you have, $20,000 in federal loans. But if those loans were unsubsidized, you would build a little less than $3,000 in interest while you're in school and during your grace period. At the end of your grace period, the accrued interest, and as we can see in this scenario, it's $2,937, will actually be added to your principal loan amount. So instead of, and previously you may have thought you had $20,000 in student loans, but if you don't pay any of your accrued interest, it gets added, and then you actually have $22,937 in student loans when you enter repayment. So why that's important is this third paragraph here that you see, because you'd be paying an extra $31 a month throughout the duration of your repayment if you let your loans capitalize. It's really another word for compound interest, or interest on top of interest. So if you have the ability to make any payments on accrued interest of your loans before your grace period runs out, it's always a great idea to do so. Chris and I like to mention anytime we can that money for loan payments always makes a great graduation gift if you have any friends or family members out there who are searching for something to get you. Repayment plans. So there are 8 main repayment plan options in total, divided into 3 main categories. Now, we won't go through all 8 plans because that would take the rest of tonight and possibly into tomorrow morning. But what we will do is talk about kind of the 3 main categories and how they're different and what some of the benefits are of each. So you have your standard repayment plan, where you'll make one flat payment every month for 10 years. You'll pay the lowest total amount in interest this way. Then we have graduated repayment plans, where your payments will start off lower once you enter repayment, and they typically increase by a set percentage every 2 years. But because of that, you will pay more in total interest over time. But sometimes the graduated plan is a good option for students who are a little unsure of what their work situation is going to be like right out of college, or maybe they know their first job is not going to be paying them a ton of money, but over time they feel better about earning a larger income. So sometimes the graduated repayment plan is a good option. And then lastly, you have a variety of income-based repayment plans. So in income-based repayment plans, your monthly payments can vary anywhere from 10 to 20% of your discretionary income. It is recalculated every year based on the previous year's tax return. So it can actually go up or down. You could pay maybe $150 a month one year, and then the following year it could drop to $125, and then the year after that it might go to $175. So it can vary up or down from year to year. And because of this, you'll pay a little more in interest, similar to the graduated repayment plan. However, if you're interested in federal loan forgiveness programs, usually the income-based plans are the best option. And we have a whole slide dedicated to loan forgiveness. So if you have questions about that, hold them for the time being. Oh, and I'm sorry, if you did want to see all 8 repayment plans, there is a handy link down here if you'd like to read all of the fine print details about all of the repayment plans. So you may be asking yourself at this point, how do I know what the best repayment plan is for me? And that's a good question, but the student aid website actually has a really handy resource that you can use to find out. So we're actually going to go through a scenario together with their loan simulator, and I'm going to ask for a little bit of participation. So let me stop sharing for a moment, and I'll start sharing a new screen. All right, and I think everyone should be able to see the loan simulator. Great. So Chris, I'm going to rely on you to monitor the chat. I'm going to ask a few questions, and maybe if you want to pick out a brave response, we'll use them here. So the really neat thing about the loan simulator is that you can actually use your FSA ID and log in, and then it will auto-populate all of the loans, all of the federal loans you have to your name to the dollar. So instead of guessing like we're about to do, you can actually see your loans in real time. But just so you can see how it works, we're going to go to, I want to find the best repayment strategy, and we'll start from scratch. So it'll ask you a few personal questions. You can always feel free to select what applies to you, and it's completely fine if none of these apply to me. But in this scenario, we're going to say that maybe we already have our first job offer. So we have a job, and we'll estimate what our income is going to be. Now this is, so I know we had a few people volunteer what state they were from. Who wants to use their state in an example here? It's all good fun.
So somebody, the first to pop in was New York.
Winner. Okay, New York. Go to New York. We will go to continue. We will say, so there's also a few places where you can actually use your institution to find loan averages and starting salary averages. But we're just going to go, we'll do a really nice round number. We'll say $40,000 a year. We can leave the inflation for income just like it is. We'll go to continue. And we will use national loan averages for this example. And who would like to volunteer the type of school that they're at? You'll see the choices here on the screen.
Four-year public is the winner.
Four-year public, okay. So there it'll show you an average of what the average student has in student loans and average interest rate, just so we can get an example going. Then it'll ask you if you're interested in public service loan forgiveness. So we're going to select yes on this for right now, but we'll talk about it a little bit more in a few slides of what it really means. And I think this is the last time I'll ask for participation just for fun. What kind of public agency do folks out there want to work for after graduation?
Got a request for 501c3.
Okay, done deal. Oh, sorry, there was one more place I wanted to ask for participation. So what do we want our primary goal to be for loan repayment? So there's a few different options, and it will change the repayment plans that it presents to you. And this will change to each and every one of you, like Chris mentioned at the beginning of your values and your goals. And there's really no wrong answer, but we do have to pick one for right now.
Okay, they want to pay them off as quickly as possible.
Okay, good choice. So you'll go to view results. And then what it does is up here at the top, it will tell you what it thinks your one best plan is. So in this case, it was the revised pay-as-you-earn plan. A big reason for that is because you selected you're interested in loan forgiveness. But what's really cool is you'll scroll down here, and if you go to view and compare all plans, it will actually give you a brief blurb about all of the plans you qualify for. It will tell you an estimate of what your monthly payment will be, the total amount you'll pay, and then how much, if you're eligible for any forgiveness. So this is really, really handy. I would encourage everyone to do this on their own time. And you'll notice, I did want to point out, going back a couple slides ago, so this standard plan, you see you have one monthly payment, it stays the same, and you'll also notice that your total to be paid ends up being the least amount over time. So that's the repayment simulator. It's really easy to use, and I would encourage all of you to do that. Let me start sharing again. So forgiveness, I remember seeing quite a few of you had questions about loan forgiveness. There are 2 programs offered by the federal government for loan forgiveness. We'll talk about each briefly. The first one is called Public Service Loan Forgiveness. If you think you might be interested in it, I would highly encourage you to visit the URL you're seeing here on the screen, because they will go into a lot more detail than we will here tonight. But just so you get the specifics of the program and how it works, you have to be employed by a U.S. government organization or qualified nonprofit organization. You can find a full list of these institutions at the website above. You have to repay your loans under an income-driven repayment plan, and you have to be on that plan the entire time you're repaying your loans. And you have to make 120 qualifying loan payments, which is the standard 10-year repayment. So essentially what they're counting on here is by working at a public, like in the public sector, you probably will be making a little less money than you would be in the private sector. And so by being on the income-driven repayment plan, your monthly payments will be slightly lower. After making those 120 qualifying payments, the remainder of what you owe on your student loans can be forgiven. However, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in general is not in very good shape. A vast majority of the people who have applied to it so far have been denied for reasons that oftentimes are not very clear. And so what we always like to tell students is, if you're interested in going down this route, please make sure it's because you want to work in the public sector and not because you're counting on this program, because we hate to see it when students take a certain career field just because they think they're going to get their loans forgiven, and then it ends up not working out for them. Because 10 years is a really significant time of your life to be in a specific situation and then have it not work out for you. There's also a teacher loan forgiveness program, which is in a lot better shape than the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. Additionally, if you're interested in it, please visit the link here. You have to be employed as a qualified teacher for 5 complete and consecutive years. And you have to be employed at an elementary school, secondary school, or educational service agency that serves low-income students. So if you'd like to know what the federal government means by a qualified teacher, or means by 5 full and consecutive years, in addition to a complete listing of schools that qualify for this plan, please visit the link that you see under Teacher Loan Forgiveness. This plan, it does work the same way as the public service loan forgiveness, though. You have to be on an income-driven plan and make 120 qualifying payments before any income is potentially forgiven. It is important to note, though, that any federal loans that are forgiven can be treated as taxable income on your following year's taxes. That is not ideal, but you're still going to take a lot less of a hit from doing that than you would from actually paying the loans. So that brings us to our next question break. I'm sure there are a few here, so we will pause, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat.
Dustin, we did have one question in the chat, which is about which of the possible repayment plans are the least favorable. I think that to some extent you covered that by walking through the simulator, and by least favorable, I take that to mean the most expensive to the student. So any of the ones that are not going to make you eligible for or if you're not going to be eligible for forgiveness at the end of the period, any of the ones that extend the repayment period for you, like the graduated one, you're gonna pay more interest, or if you have ones that are on longer terms of say 15 years or even longer than that, it's going to likely be more expensive to you. And as you pointed out, Dustin, that standard plan of 10 years, 120 payments at the same monthly rate is the fastest way, is the least expensive way to do it over 10 years. And of course, there's nothing to prevent you from being on a plan, but also making additional payments during your repayment period.
Certainly, yes, and you can change your repayment plan, like Chris just said, at any time once you're in repayment. There are no penalties or fees. Yes, thank you for bringing that up.
And another question. Oh, go ahead, Kavya.
Sorry. So for loan forgiveness, you only pay for 120 months, and the total amount paid does not have to be the total amount you owe because loans are forgiven.
In theory, yes, but you'll just want to make sure, Chris is nodding his head. In theory, yes, you'll just want to make sure you're doing absolutely everything, all of the rules for your particular program to make sure you're on track. But yes, that is how it works.
And I actually have a follow-up question. So for the 120 months, and does it have to be within 10 years? Like, can you pay it off less than 10 years, or can you do like fewer payments but higher amounts? How does
you have to make the 120 payments. Now, if you pay it off earlier, then nothing would be forgiven. You're only going to qualify for that for potential forgiveness at your 121st month. So if you have managed to pay it off before then that's great for you, but you did miss out on the forgiveness.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course.
Going back to the public service loan forgiveness, what the evidence that we're finding, reporting that we're finding, is that oftentimes the errors that are keeping people from qualifying for it are made with the loan servicers, which is problematic. And it means more than ever that you really should be vigilant, as Dustin suggested earlier, and communicate regularly with your loan servicer to be sure that you are enrolled in a repayment plan that qualifies for the type of loan forgiveness that you're looking for. It's, when humans are involved in processes, errors happen. So they have the legislation, the rules are challenging and complex, but it is the job of your servicer to be sure they understand that and are advising you accordingly. So again, more reason than ever to develop a good relationship with your loan servicer.
Definitely. All right, we will move on. Please keep the questions coming if you have them. I just saw another chat flash. Was this something we should talk about now?
Yeah, this is actually about the CARES Act. So
okay.
How has the CARES Act worked into student loans? My 6-month mark has passed as of today, but I was sent a letter saying that I don't need to make payments until September 2021 due to COVID.
No, so September 2020, actually,
Yes,
the CARES Act provisions last
Yeah,
until September 30th, 2020.
Yeah, there are some pending bills in Congress to perhaps extend that beyond September of 2020. So write to your congressperson and encourage them to fight for legislation that may provide you a longer term of relief, depending upon your financial situation. But there are some I've seen that are potentially allowing graduates from this spring and summer to have up to 2 years before they enter repayment. So they have to get, most of them, as you might imagine, are being originated in the House, and they would still have to get through the Senate, which is, the Senate is traditionally, regardless of who is in charge and the majority in that House, is notoriously the place where legislation goes to sit on the back burner. So the more pressure you can put on your own legislators, perhaps the better it is. So,
and it looks like they have a follow-up question. So what would you advise, start paying ASAP or waiting for legislative to push any new bills?
Well, I can say it's always advisable to make your payments. If you are in repayment, it's always advisable to make your payments on time and not to hope for being sort of helped out by legislation that may not come. I would not wait on that.
No.
If any legislation is passed related to this, it may or may not include anything that's retroactive to September 30th. So we would just have to wait and see. But always, whenever it comes to financial obligations, whether it's a credit card bill or a rent payment or car loan or your student loans, it's always best to make that if you possibly can. And if you can't, then you definitely want to reach out to your loan servicer. Yeah.
Speaking of, we actually have a question. So when you say loan servicer, I imagine you're referring to the company as a whole, or does an individual get a specific contact from their loan servicer?
The company as a whole.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Please keep questions coming. We will go ahead and move on to the next section for now. Just want to be mindful of time. So we'll move into consolidation and refinancing. Now, these are two words that often are used interchangeably. A lot of people think that they're kind of one and the same, and that's not necessarily the case. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's different between the two. So starting with consolidation. What that really means is you're combining multiple federal loans into a new loan with a fixed interest rate based on your average interest rates on your loans. So the key thing to take away here is that it's multiple federal loans and federal loans only. There are no additional fees to consolidate, and it does not save you any money on interest. The primary benefit to consolidating your federal loans is if you have multiple loan servicers. Maybe you did your undergrad, let's say in Georgia, and then you worked for a few years and then moved to Ohio and went to grad school. You might have different loan servicers. So rather than making multiple payments per month, you might be interested in consolidating your federal loans to just make one payment per month. If you're interested in consolidation, you can apply for it and read more about it directly on the studentaid.gov website. So the link to that is right here. Refinancing is a little different than consolidation, mostly because it's centered more around private loans. You'd be combining multiple private loans or multiple private and federal loans together into one new loan at a new interest rate. Refinancing does have the potential to lower the amount of interest you're paying over time, but it may not always be the right idea. If you refinance your federal loans, so let's say you have one private loan and one federal loan, and you'd like to refinance them because you've been offered maybe 2 or 3% interest, and that's going to save you maybe a couple $1,000s over time. But if you do that, once you refinance, you're losing any federal protections you have. So basically everything that we talked about with the CARES Act, maybe you decide to go to graduate school later, and rather than your loans being deferred, they would not be. You'd still be on the hook for making repayments. So if you think you might be interested in refinancing, just think about it. Make sure you feel really good about your job security and your emergency savings fund and your ability to pay if something went haywire in the future, because once you go down that route, there's kind of no turning back. I'm sure we'll have questions about that. Please feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll come to another question slide in just a few moments. Deferment and forbearance are two protections that exist to temporarily stop or lessen your federal student loan payments. Deferment is a stop on student loan payments or a reduction of the amount of your monthly payments, where the key factor is that students are not responsible for paying accrued interest during this time. So a good example of deferment is everything I talked about with the CARES Act at the beginning of the presentation. All of those provisions are in effect temporary deferments on your student loans. So some of the other ways you could qualify for a deferment on your loans are unemployment, an economic hardship, going to graduate school, or joining the U.S. military. There's a laundry list of items. I believe the link will pop up at the end of this slide if you're curious in finding out other ways to qualify for a deferment. Forbearance is very similar to deferment. The only difference is that students are responsible for paying the interest during a forbearance period. So some of the reasons you might be able to qualify for loan forbearance are if you have a medical or dental internship residency, if you join AmeriCorps, if you're on the teacher loan forgiveness program, or if you join the National Guard. Ooh, I did not include the link. I'm sorry about that. There is a full list of reasons on the studentaid.gov website. But as Chris mentioned a few moments ago, it's really critical to always contact your loan servicer if you think you might qualify for one of these programs, or if you're just interested in opening up a conversation about it. Especially if you feel like for 1 month you might have to miss a payment, or if you have to make a partial payment. Always contact your loan servicer. They don't want your account to go into default, and they will work with you. So always feel like that's someone you can go to once you've entered repayment. So lastly, we'll talk about delinquency and default. These are two kind of scary sounding words, and we hope that no one on this call will ever have to worry about delinquency or default, but it's still important to go over just so you can have the background information. So having your student account be delinquent happens on the day after the due date when a full payment has not been made. Whether that payment is completely missed, or if you're short by $1, the day after your payment date, your account will be known as delinquent. At this point, loan servicers will begin trying to prevent your account from going into default. So part of a few of the ways they do this are by contacting your references. So if any of you have completed your federal loan exit counseling, you'll remember that you have to include a few references. It can be family members or friends. And the reason you have to do this is if your account becomes delinquent, you have to list people that may be able to get in contact with you. Default occurs after 270 days of your account being delinquent. This is not a place that you want to be. It can stay on your credit report for 7 years, and it's very hard to recover from your student loans going into default. So again, I will say, you know, if you feel like you're in trouble, if you feel like you have questions or you're not going to be able to make a payment, always investigate maybe changing your repayment plan or talk to your loan servicer about options that may be available to you, because we don't want to see your student loan account in default. And there is a little more information on what to do if you're in danger of being in default available at the student aid website. So we want to save plenty of time for kind of a final Q&A, but it is important to talk about some long-term financial planning goals. So student loans are a part, should be an important part of your long-term budget and financial plan, but not the only part. I know that right now, maybe some of you are still in school, or hopefully we have a lot of recent graduates on this presentation, but right now it seems like student loans might be the only thing on your mind. But it shouldn't be the only thing on your mind. We strongly recommend that a regular savings plan and a regular budget plan be a part of your financial goal, your long-term financial plans, especially when you're paying off your student loans. The coronavirus pandemic, it's been terrible. Those that had an emergency. I just froze. Can everyone still hear me? Oh no.
You just came back, Dustin.
Okay, and I'm so sorry. Can everyone hear me?
Okay, now.
I will share again. I'm sorry about that. So I'm not sure where it cut out, but the current pandemic was a lot less drastic for those people who had a proper emergency fund in place. And things like COVID-19 have really redefined what an emergency means, because as many of you are aware, things really did kind of change overnight for a lot of people in America and across the world. That are towards young adults, and they're written by young adults, by Aaron Lowry. So if you think you might be interested in learning a little more about personal finance in general, I highly encourage you to check out some of those websites, those books. We have one final question we'd like to ask everyone. So please use the chat box. But which action items do you feel like you might be able to implement now to feel more in control of your student loans? We'd love to hear it, and then we'll open it up for a final Q&A.
This is great. We're getting a ton of responses here.
Yeah, absolutely. So please keep those coming in, but I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to turn it back over to Kavya and Chris for kind of a final Q&A.
Thanks, Dustin. So we had one question earlier. If you make extra payments each month, will they all go to the interest of different loans before being applied to the principal?
Yeah, that's a great question. Federal rules require that if there is outstanding accrued interest, that any payments over and above what your minimum monthly payment is get applied to that first. So you're not going to drop your principal any with extra payments until you've got that accrued interest taken care of. And so we'll refer back to that comment that Dustin made sooner, that if you have friends or family who want to help you with your student loans, anything they can do to help you drive down that accrued interest is great, because chances are, especially if it's I don't know, say a parent or an uncle or an aunt or a friend, the parent of a family friend, they probably understand compound interest, and they understand, they get bigger bang for their buck, if you will, in terms of the gift that they're providing for you. So yeah, so it's going to happen. It's going to have to go to accrued interest first, but use any and all resources you have available to you.
Awesome. Any other questions, guys? I'm gonna give it in a few more seconds. Okay, so I heard that some loans use simple interest rather than compound interest. Is this true, and what are the differences?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with any loans that use a simple interest. Simple interest is rarely works in your favor. It almost always works in the favor of a large financial institution. I'm sorry, compound interest rarely works in your favor unless you're an investor. Simple interest, I don't know of any lender who would use simple interest. It could be a private lender in that regard, but all federal loans use a compound interest model. So you grow your money much more quickly with compound interest than you do with simple interest. And then again, when it's working against you, when it's working for a financial institution, it's going to be compound interest. So I can't say whether it's true or not. I've just never heard of anybody who uses simple interest for calculating student loans.
Thank you. All right, keep those questions coming, guys.
And while people are thinking about questions, I saw several people responding and talking about an emergency fund, and Dustin referred to an emergency fund. For those of you who are still in school or who are going back to school, it's not a bad time to be borrowing on student loans, especially if you're still in undergraduate and you have typically qualified for the subsidized loan. Some students are very reluctant, very loan averse. It could be a family cultural trait, or could be sort of a larger community identification trait. But this year, the undergraduate student loan rate is 2.75% this coming year. I don't know that they've ever been that low, honestly, frankly, in the history of the student loan program. So this is a very unusual year in many ways. And so I am recommending to students that they might consider, if they didn't typically borrow their subsidized loans before, or any of their loans before, they might consider taking the subsidized portion and putting it aside, perhaps in an interest-bearing account, a high yields with an online bank, a high yield savings account. And then if they are disciplined, I would only suggest this if they're disciplined about not spending that money on unnecessary items. But if you borrow that subsidized loan, you're effectively creating an emergency fund for yourself. If you never need that emergency fund, you can just pay that loan off prior to the end of your grace period, and you never pay a cent of interest. But it's just something for people to think about who may be still in school. It's a bit different if you finish your undergraduate degree and you're going to graduate school, because those are all unsubsidized or graduate plus loans. So just bear that in mind. This is really just a potential strategy for undergraduate students who qualify for the subsidized loan.
Awesome. We have another question. So I am currently a high schooler, and I have learned a lot today from this presentation. What is the most important thing I need to know when it comes to managing and paying off student loans?
Well, first of all, good for you for jumping on this. I'm not going to embarrass my own high schooler, but she can't get away from talking about personal finance with me. But I love that you're doing this. And I saw your Mariners cap, I think, as well. So go Mariners. I think the most important thing is to stay on top of them. As Dustin indicated at several points along the way, make your student loans part of your overall financial plan for college. They are an excellent way to fund your college education that doesn't require your parents potentially from if they contribute to a retirement fund, for example, it doesn't require them to reduce their contributions to that. It doesn't require them to take out loans at a higher interest rate. and potentially imperil themselves financially down the road. It's a great way for you to build credit over time, and your ability to pay those loans after you graduate, after you complete your degree, will help to improve that your credit rating, and therefore make it easier and cheaper for you to borrow money down the road. You'll get better interest rates by having a higher credit score. They are guaranteed just by completing the FAFSA. If you have financial need, again, you get that subsidized loan as part of your offer. But I think making those loans a part of your overall strategy. So have a strategy, have a very frank conversation with your family about what that looks like. My daughter, for example, knows that her mom and I have saved for her to attend, ideally, fingers crossed, but ideally have her to attend an in-state school in the state of Virginia without having to take out substantial loans, and for us not having to take out substantial loans. And she knows that if she wants to go to a private institution or an out-of-state public, that she's going to need to get financial aid that's going to be equivalent to whatever that delta is, that difference between going in-state and going out of state. So it's really important to have that conversation. It's very frank. You have your parents help explain to you what they can do and what they can't do. That might be difficult. Some families are very averse to talking about money. So just trying to edge into the conversation with your parent or parents and see what it looks like and what is available to you. In other words, what can you know first off that from the start that it may not be feasible unless there's a huge financial aid package. But have the conversation now. Think about loans as being part of an overall strategy rather than something that you bank on perhaps too heavily. And talk with your folks as well. Ask them if they're willing to share. Have they set up any sort of college savings plan for you already? What does that look like? Do you have a grandparent or anybody else who may have set one up for you? But I think having that conversation now, have it be really frank. Try to keep the emotions out of it if you possibly can. Don't get defensive if the answer that you hear isn't exactly what you might have been hoping for first. But keep that conversation going. And I should also say, when you're going to visit colleges, when we're allowed to visit colleges again, but you can do it virtually, start conversations sooner rather than later with the financial aid offices at the schools that you're considering. See what's available. They might be able to, all of them should have a net price calculator on their website where you can go in and potentially sit down with your parents and you can simulate what type of an aid offer you might get from those schools. And that may help drive the direction that you go to. Again, it comes down to what are your values? What are the things that you value about your education? And then what are your goals? Is graduate school part of it as well? You have to consider that. And then that should help drive your decisions. And it's a collective family decision when it comes to paying for an undergraduate degree.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to wrap up the event right now. If you guys have any more questions, we'll hang around for a second or two at the end to kind of answer those for you. But once again, so we're Young Not Broke. You can find us online at youngnotbroke.co or at young_not_broke on Instagram. Feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. That's where we share a lot of great articles, stories, and also any announcements of future events. So that's definitely where we'd love you to kind of head over to. And then again, thank you, Chris and Dustin, for today's event. Thank you for sharing wonderful information. It was definitely very, very beneficial. So these are their email addresses if you guys have any follow-up questions. We'll also hang around for a minute or two, but feel free to reach out to them. You can also reach out to us on the website or just shoot us an email at hello@youngnotbroke.co if you have any questions. We will follow up with a recording of the event and also share some of the relevant resources and things that Chris and Dustin linked to in today's presentation. So